But I mean, like, let's just say, no matter when I worked, when I had my food truck, for instance, in Austin, no matter how great the day was or whatever, at the end of the day, I would always be like, man, I wish I would have done this. So is there anything like y'all wanted to add into the show, but you didn't get a chance, or something that was on the cutting room floor that, you wished had made it, or I don't know.
I mean, I think you end up leaving so much on the cutting room floor for sure. I mean, there are things that like there are things that at the beginning that I never would have imagined we would have cut. Like just as using Diana as an example, the idea that she talks about in terms of redaction, like the ways in which not just that, the ways that we tell these stories differently to ourselves, not just to other people, and how an understanding of the ways that we redact ourselves help us to get closer and kind of excavate the core of what these experiences actually are. And I think we touched on it tangentially, but like that's something that I would have loved to have done more of a deep dive on. But at a certain point, like you kind of just have what you have, and you know, I've said that in terms of like writing projects that I've done, the television's very different. And, if I'm writing for my podcast or something like that, that's sort of painting. I'm creating something out of whole cloth. But when we're creating, as Jay and I were working together creating the show, it's like sculpting. You're like, you have to keep taking away and taking away and taking away and until it's the thing you're trying to make. And unfortunately, you end up taking away some of your favorite stuff. But we're thinking about different ways to save some of that content to like resurface it and share it with people because we cut so much that we're like, gosh, this is gold. So we're working on that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you see Courtney's ranch in Texas, and it's, for those of you that haven't seen the show, there's a lot to it, and maybe we can dig into that further into our conversation here. But it's a paranormal ranch. Courtney lives on a ranch where there's like a long history of paranormal situations, and part of that we covered a cattle mutilation case, and I think we covered it pretty well. Like it was a beautiful, like for the subject matter, considering how dark the subject matter is, it was actually a beautiful shot. Like the shots looked great, and I was like really proud of them. It was in this field of flowers, and I was like, this is so weird. Like it looks incredible. Like, and there are a lot of interesting conversations to have about like why was it found there, and like it was Courtney's like prize. It was like his favorite cow, and like, what does that mean? And like really kind of looking at things beyond just the kind of like surgical aspect of the case, and looking at kind of the history of the ranch, where it was and things like that, and trying to get more context there. And I thought we did a pretty responsible job of it, or at least had the seeds for like a really thoughtful segment. But in the end, like it didn't fit the tone of what we were looking at with some of the other segments, the way that it all fit together. And at the end of the day, that overall structure and that through line of reasoning and like where are we going in our exploration, it didn't quite fit. It became kind of more of a distraction. And so that would be one thing that like I really wish that we could have had that more nuanced conversation there, but it couldn't happen in the context of our 3 episodes.
Yeah, no, well said. I mean, that's so similar to like cooking and creating menus, and like especially tasting menus where you're trying to tell a story from this dish to this dish, and you create a bunch and you have a lot of ideas, but then you go, you know what? This is a great dish on its own, but it doesn't fit in to what the story I'm trying to tell here. And you know, it's like films and whatever, it's like a scene may be really cool, but you know what, it doesn't fit the whole story here. And you cut the fat, essentially, as we say in the kitchen, right? You got to cut the fat and kind of get to what we're trying to do. And I can only imagine trying to put together what y'all did, and you have so much footage, and yeah, you have this cool piece. Oh, this would be great, but you know what, we're telling this story, what happened before this and what's happening after the scene. We have to consider that too, right? Like you said, the whole thorough line. I'm glad that y'all had that in mind. It clearly shows, it tells a story the whole way. It keeps you kind of engaged. So yeah, no, that's super cool. Kelly, you said something on a clip that I saw today on an interview you did with Night Shift. Shout out to Clint. Love Clint. Had him on the show many times. I've been on his show plenty of times. Great guy. And you said something that's really stuck with me, because I've actually had the same sort of thought, being new to myself in this community. which is, and I'll let you take it away. I just wanted you to know what exactly I'm talking about. You basically were trying to
Mhm.
separate, the this journey of trying to get disclosure, from the government, but also there's a journey to just study the phenomena on its own, right? Do you know what I'm talking about? Do you mind kind of explaining that a little bit, and then we can dive into that because I love that idea.
Sure. Yeah, happy to talk about this. And this is something Jay and I talk about all the time. And I think in some ways was maybe the at least the secondary thesis of cosmosis, like kind of one of the ideas that we were really trying to get across, which is that you know we've gotten to this place with with disclosure, and disclosure is extraordinarily important, right? But at the same time, I think that if once you're staring at this long enough, you realize that kind of like that it's not quite what it appears to be, right? I think that I've been thinking a lot about Carl Nell's talk at Soul, the first Soul Symposium, and there's been so much talk about that particular talk because he was really kind of laying out not just the timeline of disclosure, but also kind of what the rationale was, how they were balancing various risks against each other, the sorts of thinking and risk mitigation that would even cause them to move forward with this in the first place. And to be there and to sit in that audience and be like, well, gosh, it looks like we're a few years into what appears to be a like 15 to 20-year process. And when you and everyone like talks about that, and everyone talks about that talk, but what I'm not seeing a ton of is people like recalibrating how they're interpreting what we're looking at with disclosure through that lens. And it doesn't have to be like we get stuck in these binaries where it's like these certain people in the field, they're either absolute heroes or they're like from the devil. There's nothing in between. And when the truth is that like the intelligence apparatus is something that we created to keep us safe, to keep certain information away from our enemies, which in today's connected world involves keeping it away from us. Like, it's not an institution from which we should be seeking truth, because that's literally not how it operates. It's not what it's set up for. It's not what it's meant to do. And so, like, these people don't have to be evil people, but it's pretty clear that whatever it is we're dealing with disclosure is some kind of a long range, hesitate to say psyop because it's so like so much negativity associated with it. But I mean, it's basically an operation that's being put forward to help people acclimate to something that they think it's going to take us about 10 to 20 years to acclimate to. And there's nothing, there, like I said, there doesn't have to be anything nefarious about that. But in the meantime, that conversation is defining everything about how we talk about the UFO phenomenon. If it's not coming through those kind of like official disclosure channels, then we can't really trust it. We got to wait for the science, except who's doing the science? Where is the science happening? Like, and we're supposed to just continue it to be sort of like this question and answer session with the intelligence community about what's going on here. And meanwhile, we're acting as though this is something that they can keep from us, which they can't. The UFO phenomenon is everywhere. It's in every culture. It's throughout our history. They can't hide it from us. So like, we don't have to wait around. Like, those things, it's not that I'm against disclosure. I think disclosure is a good thing. I want to help wherever I can. But like, I also think that, and this is something I know Jay and I talk about all the time, that we need to be creating kind of a different track of inquiry that acknowledges that disclosure is not the end all be all of what we know about this phenomenon. There's so much more, and we don't need anyone's permission to explore it.
Yeah, no, well said. You want to add on, Jay?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with everything Kelly just said. And, amplifying what she said to a degree, the situation is such that, as it's often said by folks that we all know in the community, well, there's always the comparisons to China and Russia, and we have to keep careful of China or Russia. Those are often the two kind of boogeymen, like, nemesis that we see in kind of like the nation states. And then there are others, obviously. There are consortiums. There are even, situations that could be beyond a nation state in terms of intelligence, as people have kind of started talking about, like, what are these drones, these quote unquote drones over arsenals and such, like very close to me and around the world, right? Like, maybe it could be a private intelligence company, and what would that entail? And like, there's actually a lot, there's a lot of possibilities there. It's something that we've actually looked at as a community and in general for years now. But when we talk about the disclosure movement, there's all these kind of situations where And I agree with Kelly. It's incredibly important. I was at the Grush hearing. Like it was a huge historic day. I was happy to be there. It will remain like a very key memory for me for the rest of my life. And it was incredibly inspiring. And I hope to see many more inspiring days like that and more good legislation put forward and things like that. And at the same time, I'm also the director of the Experiencer Group. And I hold support sessions for experiencers every week where we're comparing, like, I have incredibly profound, incredibly bright, brilliant people in that community that are sitting and comparing notes about what they've experienced. And like, I see more data points connecting in sessions like that than I see online. And it's because of the tone online. And it's because of the way that these conversations have been stigmatized. And that's my subjective opinion, of course. And other people can view it differently. But like, from my perspective, like Kelly, we need to take an all roads approach to this. If you're interested in this field, if you have gifts and you're interested in this field, whether you're an engineer, a physicist, a chef, right, a podcaster, an anthropologist, if you're a futurist, if you're a folklorist, if you're a psychologist, if you're a psychiatrist, if you're a doctor, there are so many paths to travel on this and gifts that you can bring, because it touches on all aspects of our lives. It really, really does. And so, it's not about saying like, boo, DC. But the thing about it is that look at what's happened here. I mean, so much of the world recognizes the systems of propaganda that have like infiltrated our legacy media, right? Like on all levels. I mean, look at this last election. Look at the drone spin. Look at how anytime that there's a tragedy in the world, it gets spun. It's not even. It's almost as if in some situations, like, there's more attention paid to like how to spin it than how to deal with the fallout and how to like help people. I mean, look at people already with the fires in LA. That's a horrible, horrible situation. I mean, like, just one of those fires is like twice the size of Manhattan. Like, this is wild stuff. And like, what does that mean? And what do I see on the news? People are like, which politician is to blame for this? And it's like, there are much bigger questions to ask here. And there's lots of boots on the ground stuff to do right this very moment, but that's how we've been trained. That's perception management. That's social engineering. And that's another thing that we try to cover in Cosmosis, like how that perception management, how that social engineering affects our lives and what it does to us. So yeah, there's brightness to it, there's darkness to it, and we try to paint with all the colors of the rainbow when handling this topic.
No, well said. I mean, try telling the firefighter actually fighting the fire, "Hey, which politician do we blame?" He's like, "What the?" I'm here trying to put out the fire. So like, I get it. There's always a disconnect between what's actually happening and how it's told what's happening. There's always a disconnect there, and probably till the end of time. And I know the internet didn't make it any easier. It kind of helped, but it's a double-edged sword, right? It's the good and the bad come with that access to immediate knowledge, because everyone has access to put out knowledge, and you don't know where they're coming from, and whether it be the media, just a regular person posting, an influencer, right, whatever. It's hard to dive through the waters and wade through the waters of information and find a buoy to grab onto so you don't drown, essentially.